So hi there. I've tried to start chapter 3 here, said this video several times, and the slides keep blowing up on me if I do it in full screen mode. So let's try this just as if we were working on the slides. Okay, so we're going to go into chapter 3, which is about attitudes and ethics and self-concept and that sort of thing. And, it's as we kind of get into this, attitudes are these things we have to, do we need to explain attitudes? It's the things we have in life, positive or negative towards something, but they can affect our job and they can affect our relationships. Most important thing is attitudes oftentimes can change, and it's in that changing that we sometimes become a heck of a lot more effective. So in the book there is, I think it's like on page 65 or so, there is an assessment and whether you're more theory X or theory Y. Now, again, this is attitudes. And if you remember theory X and theory Y, this is from McGregor. McGregor felt that you had two spectrums, right? You had the theory X people who basically thought everyone was lazy and needed to be punished or forced into doing their job. And theory Y is sort of a servant leader kind of person. They believe that people are generally good, that they generally want to succeed, and all you have to do is take the challenges out of their way that are stopping them from being the best version of themselves they can be. So you can go in there and you can find out that you may be leaning one way attitude-wise than another. And some of this may have due to personal experiences. If, for example, you spent your entire life working with managing teenagers at an ice cream stand, I think your view may be very theory X, right? If you were spending most of your life dealing with highly educated professionals, you might find your belief as being very theory Y. So your attitude may also change based upon the environment in which you find yourself. Okay, so there's theory X, micromanage people, theory Y, you sort of believe. And another point that they make here in the book is that there tends to be a Pygmalion effect. Now, if you guys remember Pygmalion, also under the play My Fair Lady or the movie My Fair Lady, depending upon how I treat someone, they will live up to that standard. So if I treat them as if they're lazy and corrupt, then maybe they'll be lazy and corrupt. If I treat them as if they're honest and well-intentioned, maybe they'll be honest and well-intentioned. And very often these things become self-fulfilling. Kind of difficult or in the throes of trying to get people to change, though, because if they've been for a long period of time being treated a certain way, they are likely to react that way. So there may be a transitional phase you'll have to work with just so that you don't end up having mayhem or being terribly disappointed. And your attitudes is also, you could take a test on that, or your general attitudes. But in general, the more positive you are, the more successful you will be. It's kind of it's fairly general, that statement, but it as a general rule, it tends to be true. I'm not suggesting that you should be, some sort of starry-eyed, Pollyannic individual where you just believe that everything's going to come up buttercups and roses. However, if you are the opposite of that, and you always believe that that everything's going to turn out negative, you're Sally Sadsack, that tends to follow you. And there's a number of studies that have been done that show that one bad apple can actually affect an entire team. So you really want to look towards being aware of your personal attitudes and how they may be affecting the general results. As the Stoics used to say, nothing is good or bad except what you believe it to be. So, all right, so changing your attitude, controlling your attitude in your life. It's difficult to change your own attitudes. It's even harder to change the attitudes of others, but it can be done. So how do you do it? You give feedback. You let people know when their attitude sucks. You let people know when they may be creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. You try to accentuate the positive. You try to show maybe you're making progress towards something, or maybe something is improving in some way or another, or maybe something isn't as bad as what they may be making it out to be. I guess you provide consequences of reward. Positive and negative rewards can sometimes be helpful. And I think a positive role model can be helpful. People who walk the walk and talk the talk. And that may have to be the manager. Okay, so making a list of the top 7 things so you can do that. I'm not going to go into the job satisfaction is the process of determining your attitude towards work and the job environment. Satisfaction is what more people seek on a job over security and high pay. So it's going to come up here in a couple of places, and I think may have already discussed this, but if we use Hertzberg's 2-factor theory, pay is not a motivator. Pay is a hygiene factor. So if I pay you below what is normal or average for your job, you're going to be pissed. If I pay you slightly above, I'm taking that negative off the table. And if you're doing a good job and I double your salary, you are not going to double your effort as much as you think you might. You'll maybe for a little while improve slightly, but you'll probably settle right back to where you were before. So money is not a motivator, as much as many people think it is. It's a demotivator. If it's below a certain level, it can be a demotivator. If it's above a certain level, it can doesn't really improve that much your attitudes in life towards things. Okay. So, satisfied people stay longer in their job. There's less absenteeism. They're happier. Their work is generally better. So, job satisfaction surveys are the process of determining employees' attitudes. Currently, we can see a decline in workers' dedication, attendance, punctuality. And what do you think that's due to? I think so. In general, if you treat people well, and people are satisfied with their jobs, you're going to have less absenteeism and better productivity and better work effort, better work quality in general. Okay, so things that make people dissatisfied. The work itself. Is the work important? Is it interesting? Is it valuable to society? We talked about pay and benefits too are kind of doing the whole compensation thing, right? So if your benefits suck, if you're worried about your kid's health care, you're probably not going to be focused on your job. Okay, is there growth and upward mobility? Now, this is an area where there gets to be some confusion. Do you have to be on a career path to being a manager to believe that you have upward mobility and growth in your job? And the answer to that question is no. Having worked in the technology field for decades, I can tell you that I knew a lot of technologists, a lot of engineers who had no desire to be a manager whatsoever. They really wanted to work with the cool toys. And so providing them better career opportunities, more training, and providing them a level of status within the organization for recognizing their longevity, their work ethics, their level of skill and understanding, maybe a different career path than becoming a manager. So you could have junior engineers, senior engineers, elite engineers, and that going up that trail and showing growth in there, showing the fact that if you stay longer, we're going to invest in you and you'll have more skills and cooler projects to work on. That's what people in that area care about. And the same thing's true in the arts. People care more about growth and developing their art than they are necessarily about being the manager of the art team. And it's not all individuals, but you have to understand, this goes back to balance, right? What do you care about? What gets you excited? And it's different for different types of people. You have to take a look at people's supervisors. Are their supervisors just awful? Are they micromanagers? Are they just got a bad attitude? This can affect people's overall. What about the coworkers? Are the coworkers, again, are these people that you can respect and can, enjoy being around. If you can't, there's a problem. Job security. Do you believe that you're going to have a job tomorrow, next month, next year? Right? And for a lot of people, that's pretty important. Unless you're independently wealthy and can pay your bills without having a job security becomes a pretty important part of people's attitudes towards their jobs. And then the attitude towards the job itself, the respect you get, that sort of thing. And let's go back to job security too. Even when I worked for myself, there was a question of job security. And that sounds weird, right? And this is true of a lot of consultants and freelancers. You may own your own business, but if the environment in which you're working, and if you don't believe you're going to be able to get the next job, the next gig, the next piece of work, then you may have a feeling that your job is insecure, right? You may not have a contract, but if you've been working as a consultant in a field and for 30 years, whether the economy is going up or down, you're able to produce a certain level of work and have a certain level of billings and lifestyle and comfort, then you feel job security. So job security is not necessarily a real thing, it's a perceived thing. Okay, so in the U.S., the highest rate of satisfaction found among professionals, management positions, and those with non-manual jobs and with long-term contracts. Also, lower rates of satisfaction in manual labor, short-term contracts, or no contract jobs. Okay, but those are not, they're not causal, they're correlative, right? Because this could be a perception. You may not have a contract, but you believe that you're going to have the job forever because it's just the way you believe. Levels of satisfaction across cultures, increased global competition can impact job satisfaction and push employees to increase productivity and decrease satisfaction among everybody. Okay, so that all makes sense. Okay. Self-concept is what you believe about yourself. Again, this can be right, this can be wrong. And I'll tell you a couple things in general. In general, when you take a look at self-confidence, guys tend to be more confident about their own ability than women, and they tend to be overconfident in their ability, where women tend to be less confident about their ability, but are underconfident about their ability. Now, this is not true of every person. These are, individual things tend to vary here, but there is a gender difference here in people's belief in their confidence, in their attitudes towards themselves, right? And you will also take a look at this in people of different socioeconomic status. People who come from higher economic status tend to have more confidence in themselves, although not always. And people with lower economic status tend to have less confidence in themselves. Again, not always. But these are broad generalities you can begin to look at and say, why, right? What do you like about yourself? What do you think about your value as a person? Are you happy with the way that you live your life? Do you believe that you can meet challenges in your life? These kind of things. Some of this comes down to self-efficacy. Now, again, self-efficacy is a belief. It is your belief in your ability to do something. Your belief that you're good at your job. Your belief that you can achieve your goal. Your belief in whatever. Now, self-efficacy does not have to be grounded in reality. You could have this starry-eyed belief that everything's going to be great, that you're fantastic, when you really aren't. It tends to be self-fulfilling, though. If you tend to believe that you're not all that great, you tend not to do that well. If you tend to believe that you're fantastic, you may not reach the goals that you believe you're able to achieve, but you're probably going to do better than the person who believes they aren't that good. And so it can affect your ability to be successful or your ability to fail. Okay. Now, also, there's attribution is one perception of what caused something. So you can attribute your failure to your boss. You can attribute your failure to your economic status. You can attribute your failure to your lack of education. You can contribute your failure to the fact that your mother told you you're a terrible person. Whatever you attribute it to. But these tend to be excuses. They tend not to have basis in reality. So be careful of what you attribute your lack of success to. So right. A couple things that will help your self-context, or concept, I should say, is try to learn from your mistakes. We all make them. Some of us more than others, but we all make them. You should admit to them and try to learn from them. Accept and bounce back from failures. Don't dwell on the negative. Move on. Okay, so it didn't work. Okay, well, what about it didn't work? Let's figure out what to do next. Move on. Control your negative emotions and thinking. Again, your bad attitudes, your perception of self-efficacy is going to affect whether or not you do something. And I would say also, and I agree with the author here, is that you can tap into your spirituality. Now that means different things to different people. Some of us have a strong religious faith, others don't. But I think most people generally agree that there's more to the world and life than yourself. And so sort of begin to think outside of yourself. And you probably will be a lot happier. Okay, let's get into personal values. You can do a personal value sheet. It helps you kind of figure out what your values are. Values are the things that we have worth or are important to individuals. And we set our value system by setting these standards that we have. Values are kind of like attitudes, but they're much deeper held, and they're a lot less likely to change over time. Spirituality in the workplace, I think, again, this is something you need to be aware of and be sensitive to. Can be a source of strength, or can be a force of derision, depending upon how people approach this. Remember that other people have their own spirituality, their own set of religious beliefs, and they are as deeply held, or if not more deeply held, than your own. So be sensitive to how they approach life. You may believe you're right, but so do they. They believe they're right as well. And I don't think it's a good idea to try to force your spiritual values on other people in the workplace. This tends to be a sensitive topic, but it is an opportunity for growth. And for a lot of people, spirituality is a source of strength. So I would say that tap into it for yourself and be sensitive to the spirituality of others, even if you think that they're dead wrong in their approach. Okay. Guidelines for spiritual, but know yourself, be aware of your own, examine your own relationship and situations, act with authenticity, be yourself, don't try to pretend to be something that you're not. Respect and honor the beliefs of others, we talked about that. Be as trusting as you can, maintain your own spiritual practices. And believe it or not, there's a lot of studies that are out there. People who attend religious services or church on a regular basis tend to be happier. Now, you could believe that, in the way that Marx did, that religion is the opiate of the people, so therefore that makes perfect sense. They're happier because they're delusional. That may be how Marx believed, but I would tend to believe that they find strength and anchoring, and they're able to get rid of a lot of their own negative attitudes and have a sort of a positive building in their lives. So I would disagree with Marx, but I respect his ability to have his own opinion. Okay, ethics is a weird thing, okay? And I could spend a lot of time on ethics, talking about, different ethical standards. We could talk about deontology, where you look to a higher authority, such as the Bible or the Quran or the Torah, to try to get your standards for the way you should live your life. You could be taking a look at situations where you could say, in this particular situation, it would seem reasonable that this could be done this way. You could look for the greatest good for the greatest number of people, so utilitarian ethics. And you could take a look at teleological ethics, where the end essentially justifies the means. And we can keep going on these ethical standards, but the reality is that we all have to pick a standard that we are comfortable in living with, and it may not be one standard. It could be sort of a blending of a couple of standards, but you're going to get different answers with different standards. For example, if you're doing deontological ethics and you walk into your house and someone is beating a family member to death, an intruder that you've never seen before, say, someone who's trying to rob the place. Well, under deontological ethics, the rule typically is thou shalt not kill, right? So you can't harm this person. They're killing someone, but you can't stop them. Where under situational ethics or utilitarian ethics, you might say, wait a minute, that person is acting wrong. It is my moral responsibility now to destroy them. So these standards are going to change, or I should say the result may change based upon different standards as to what you end up doing, but you have to at least choose a standard and try to find a standard which you are comfortable in living with. And there's going to be social effects on this as well. Some of your standards may be seen right or wrong by the societies in which you live. And very often that creates a pressure as to what you should or should not be doing. Doesn't make it right or wrong. I'm just suggesting that there may be pressure outside of your own ethical standards from the environment in which you live to sort of conform to a broader societal ethic. Okay. 98% of people stretch the limits of their ethical behavior at times. Okay, so thinking about this, I put into the course materials a video by Clayton Christensen where he suggested how you should measure your life. And Christensen is a guy who's known in Harvard for writing about innovation in management, but he's also known for having a very high ethical standard. And one of the things that I've liked about Christensen is he's always said that it's a lot easier to be ethical 100% of the time than to be ethical 80% of the time, which is interesting because his suggestion that the one or two times where your ethics may get in your way may make it difficult for people, if they bend to those ethical standards, to stay ethical the next time or the time after that. And let me give you an example. Christensen is he's LDS, he's Latter-day Saints, so you probably know them as Mormon, and it's his religious belief, and he was brought up in that. And so he's also like 6'8". He's a huge guy, and upon graduating from Brigham Young, he played basketball at Oxford and he was one of the leading players on the team, if not the most valuable player on the team. And he helped lead the team to the European Championship. And the championship was scheduled for a Sunday. Now, he's a devout Christian, a devout LDS. So he did believe that you could not work on Sunday, that Sunday was a day of rest, and that it was against his religious beliefs to play basketball on Sunday. So he refused to play in the European Championships. As you can imagine, his coach, his team members, everyone was pushing him hard to do that. And he said, no, I don't believe it's ethical. I don't believe I can do that. That speaks to his character, obviously. Although I'm sure his teammates would have loved it if he said, well, it's okay to be ethical 80% of the time, or to live up to your values and standards 80% of the time. So that's my point, is that you have to decide. And I think if you look at the video I put in there, I think it's an interesting exercise. So most people know what's right or wrong. So why do people do unethical things? Sometimes because sometimes it seems to be the most expedient thing to do, or they're tempted by some sort of reward, short-term reward. In general, I would say that being unethical is not a good long-term play. You may make a short-term goal, you may get a quick hit on the short term, but on the long term, it generally doesn't play well. Okay, moral development, understanding the right from wrong, and choosing to do the right thing. You've got a couple different standards here. If we take a look, the pre-conventional standards, this is sort of like a childlike attitude towards doing right and wrong. If you do right, you're rewarded. If you do wrong, you're punished. And that is, kind of how children react. Conventional is sort of where many adults, if not most adults, are. And this is where you sort of tend to go along with what is the cultural norm. And, your attitude towards what's good and bad tends to be what's the cultural norm. And you adhere to authority and you maintain social order. I think when you get to post-conventional, and this is top 20% of people from a moralistic point of view, they see a social contract between themselves and others. They see that there are certain universal ethical standards that they believe that everyone should live by. And they follow their own belief no matter what. Whether they lose money, whether they lose status, whether they lose position, they tend to be very principles conscious. Okay, so ethics we talked about is situationally relevant, depends upon the group that you're in, whether or not people would see things as moral or ethical. Also depends upon the ethical standard in which you're living your life by. And so here's one as a question, and I may actually put this as a discussion question. Your wife is terribly ill. There's a drug out there which cost a producer $200 to make. They're charging $2,000. You can't scrape off the money, the total amount, but you can give them a decent profit on their original investment. You go to them and say, here, this is all I have. Can you please give me this drug? My wife is dying. And they say no. So, is it okay to break in and steal the drug? And, you can take a look at the different ethical standards that may be in play here and tell me what your thoughts are on that. But when people do unethical things, there tends to be some justification. So, people tend to have some sort of moralistic justifiable behavior, like this may be immoral, but it's to a greater, it's a teleological ethics, it solves a greater good. They displace responsibility for this, and I'm just taking orders. Now, I would, to that, I put in a video about Stanley Milgram's experiments at Yale, where he was trying to understand why people would, in Germany in World War II, actually put people in gas chambers and kill them, and how there wasn't a revolt. And so it discusses that in principle and shows how people, have shockingly the number of people who would follow as long as an authority figure says do this. And there's a diffusion of responsibility. Well, if everyone's doing it, it can't be wrong, right? Well, it could still be wrong. There's some sort of comparison to somebody doing something even more horrible than you, advantageous comparison. You could disregard or distort the consequences. Is it really that bad? What's going to happen? You can, blame someone else, which is kind of like the one above, displacement of responsibility. Or you can put some sort of euphemistic phrase on it, and I put a little video in the course material about euphemistic labeling. Euphemistic labeling might be, instead of saying I lied in the negotiation, you might say that I strategically misled someone. Slang, right? So golden rule, stakeholders approach. I'm not going to get into this stuff because I could spend a lot of time on that, but I think you get the point. Is there global relativism in certain ethical things? For example, child labor. We say it's bad, right? Child labor is bad. 12-year-olds should not be working in factories. Well, what if you're in a society where there is no social safety net, there is no welfare, there is no government checks? You're 12 years old and you're the only one in your family who isn't terribly ill, so you're supporting your mother and your father by going to work in the factory. And now, because Nike's worried about the perception of Americans, you're no longer allowed to make Nike shoes in the factory in Pakistan, and your family is going to starve. Cultural relativism. Is that right or wrong? Is there any universalisms? That's up for a discussion. Is there something that is wrong no matter what? Rape, is that wrong no matter what? Murder, is that wrong no matter what? Right? So there are certain things which I think a lot of people would agree are universally wrong, and we should try to stay within those standards. Okay, and the last thing here is a self-assessment. So I think we've covered a lot of ground with this, and it certainly went longer than what I wanted to with this video, but I think we covered some good stuff. All right, I'll see you in the next video.